Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Vaskya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Pramanityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapaturibhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyavacha Paditanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Yes, devotees, very good. So, we're going on to chapter 6, which is about Dhyana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga. And could you just lift it up so my head is slightly lower. Ashtanga Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. Okay, that's good. So we, the other night, what was that, Friday night, when we were finishing chapter 5, then we read how verses 27 and 28, the third to last and second to last verses in that chapter were introducing Ashtanga Yoga, which is a different form of yoga. Mainly we've been discussing Karma Yoga or Bhakti Yoga, sort of in the context of Karma Yoga, doing your duty preferably in an unattached way, when it's called Nishkam or desireless Karma Yoga. So the thing is that in the overall system of yoga, all the many different types of yogas, there is what is called the yoga ladder. And in fact, it's going to be referred to in one of the purports just in the early part now of chapter 6. A sense of progression from one form of yoga gradually up and up until finally we come to Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness, devotional service, and pure devotional service, which is going to be emphasized at the end in the very last verse of this chapter. And actually the fact is that this chapter 6 is the end of the first section of the whole Bhagavad Gita. We explained that at the beginning of our seminar, how Bhagavad Gita is divided into 3 sections, each of 6 chapters. The first 6, then the second 6, then the third 6 chapters. Bhagavad Gita is divided up quite clearly and really quite systematically into those 3 parts. So here in this first section, the first 6 chapters, we've been discussing different forms of yoga, particularly Karma Yoga, which is also known as Buddhi Yoga. But then there was mention of Sankhya Yoga, certain amount of mention, Jnana Yoga, particularly in chapter 2, in the beginning of chapter 2, and some Bhakti Yoga here and there, sort of adapted from Karma Yoga, like a purified and more elevated form of Karma Yoga. You could say something like that. So in the very last verse of chapter 6, Lord Krishna is going to point out that of all the different forms of yoga, Bhakti Yoga or Krishna consciousness, devotional service to Krishna, is the highest. And then actually the second section, from chapter 7 to chapter 12, they're going to focus on Bhakti Yoga. But anyway, this chapter though here, Dhyana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga, actually Dhyana Yoga is a part of Ashtanga Yoga. But the thing is this is the thing, and we've got to note this carefully, is that Karma Yoga, we've seen how Arjuna on a few occasions has almost, you could say, protested, or at least he's raised quite a serious doubt. What is the best type of yoga or the best process? And Krishna has answered that it's basically that it's karma yoga, you could say, in simple terms. Means you have to engage actively in service, in performing your duty, ideally in a detached mood. And Krishna has mentioned, he has actually mentioned, it was particularly in chapter 3. If you recall in chapter 3, in sort of in the middle of the chapter or thereabouts, Krishna, because Arjuna had been saying that I don't want to do my duty, I want to stop and sort of renounce things. But then Krishna said, no, you should, even if you are transcendental and you have no duty to perform in terms of like varnashram, karma kandya, these types of things, even if you're really so elevated you're actually transcendental, still you should do your duty, if nothing more than to set a good example for people who are not on the same level as you. And Krishna made the point, of course, that even he does that. Even though if anyone has no material duty to perform, it's Krishna, because he's got nothing to do with the material world. Doesn't have a material body. It's just, he's in a different category, a much higher category. But Krishna says, still, I perform duties. As a Kshatriya, well, as a Vaishya, you could say, but as a Kshatriya also, Krishna performs his duty. We got a Facebook problem here anyway, we'll see. Yeah, so that point was there. Best to do your duty for a few reasons. Although it's understood that if you are elevated enough, then, leaving aside the point of possibly setting an example for less advanced people, but just in terms of your own situation, if you really are transcendental, then you don't have to perform your duty. If you really are like that, you don't have any duty to perform. And then you can just remember the Lord, think of the Lord, be absorbed in the Lord, or as the chapter title, at least, there's a couple of different chapter titles for this chapter. Dhyana Yoga means a yoga of meditation on the Lord. You can just do that. And, if setting an example for others is not really you don't need to do that, it's just you and your own development, then you can perform this sort of yoga, which is beyond karma yoga, which ultimately means just becoming absorbed in meditating on and remembering the Lord in trance. So that exists. It does exist. Although generally in Bhagavad Gita, well, this chapter 6 is basically more or less, certainly it's focusing to a greater extent on this meditative, very advanced process of meditating in trance. But here and there, as Prabhupada is describing it in this chapter, he makes the point that, better to just practice Krishna consciousness, better to just be a devotee. Yeah, for different reasons. And we will see as we go through some reasons come out. But if nothing else, just for the sake of noting that this elevated form of yoga exists, Krishna devotes this chapter to it mainly. Although he does not really recommend that we do it, but because Bhagavad Gita, there are different kinds of perspectives we can have on Bhagavad Gita, and one perspective is that Bhagavad Gita summarizes all the main processes in the Vedic tradition and then brings out the best, which is Krishna consciousness, bhakti yoga, devotional service. So in that sort of context, in the sense that noting the different main processes, Krishna describes here Ashtanga Yoga. So this Ashtanga Yoga, actually if someone does it nicely, then he or she may realize the super soul and then may realize Krishna and become a devotee, actually. That possibility is there. Possibility is there. There are 8 stages in Ashtanga Yoga. In fact, Ashtanga, Ashta means 8, and Anga literally means limbs, or 8 sort of divisions, you could say, 8 different types of activities which all come together sequentially in a sequence under the heading of Ashtanga Yoga. So this is the idea here in this chapter 6. And so we're going to go through it, starting right now. And we have informed you devotees who are doing Bhakti Shastri that we will have, at the end of this week, a question and answers session on these first 6 chapters. My idea is to finish chapter 6 in 3 nights. Because a certain amount of it, a fair amount of it, isn't really directly involved in Krishna consciousness. We don't need to spend too much time on, a fair amount of it. So my idea is to finish by Wednesday night, and then Thursday night and Friday night have 2 questions and answers sessions. And you can contact Premagni Devi Dasi, Deva Prabhu, if you're English language, Mahaprabhu Kripa Prabhu, if you're Russian language. You can contact these devotees for submitting questions. Now, I must say, You know, we have at least 600 devotees doing this course. Actually, we have more. We can only take the best questions. We can't answer 600 questions. You know, previously in our other sessions when we had lesser numbers, when we had questions and answers, we would do 30 questions in 1 hour. If 600 devotees submitted just one question, that would be 20 hours, 20 days. We're not going to do that. So just submit. If you want to submit a question, you don't have to. But if you've got a question, try and submit your best question, and just one. Yeah, and then Thursday, Friday, we'll have a look at the questions. All right, so let's go into chapter 6. So first of all, introduction. So this is the last chapter of the first section of Bhagavad Gita. We already said that. It's been dealing with different types of yoga, particularly karma yoga. So now Krishna is going to discuss Ashtanga yoga. Anyway, we've said this. And then he's going to sum up the first section. Actually, one point he is going to make, just right in the first several verses of this chapter, is that this Ashtanga yoga, within which there are 2 divisions, 2 levels, in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, devotees go from karma yoga into the lower level of Ashtanga yoga. And then they leave karma yoga because they don't need to do something which is connected with their bodily nature. Karma yoga is, of course, based on your bodily nature. Arjuna is a Kshatriya, that's his bodily nature. But now going into Ashtanga yoga, if someone is qualified, means they've really come through karma yoga, become very elevated in karma yoga, and now they can stop doing duties, varnashram, like that, and they can just get into the Ashtanga yoga with its 8 divisions, which we'll tell you about in a few minutes. So, you know, generally, through Nishkam Karma Yoga, like more advanced Karma Yoga, through Bhakti Yoga, because there are connections between the 2. Knowledge develops by the mercy of the Lord. If one is doing particularly, obviously, devotional service, Krishna consciousness, Bhakti Yoga, then Krishna will certainly give revelation, knowledge will come. But even if you're doing karma yoga without material desire, detached, just offering everything to the Lord, then that's sort of like a brother or, let us say, a cousin of Bhakti Yoga, Krishna consciousness. It has elements of Krishna consciousness in it. And therefore Krishna does reveal knowledge. Because the karma yogi, advanced karma yogi, is in a renounced spirit offering everything to him. So Krishna naturally reciprocates. So, yes. So it begins. We saw in the second chapter with knowledge of the soul as distinct from matter. Then in the 5th chapter, we just saw how it can come up to the level of the super soul. You remember in the last, 10 or 15 verses of the 5th chapter, we came up to the level of the super soul. And then when a person is practicing like this, then he becomes quite Krishna conscious, realizing or understanding the super soul. So in the 6th chapter, there's this Ashtanga yoga with these kind of difficult practices, but in terms of God realization, a point is that your knowledge of the super soul from Karma Yoga, advanced Karma Yoga, can develop into knowledge of Krishna. And then you can become a devotee and take up Krishna consciousness through Ashtanga Yoga. So strictly speaking, really speaking according to the yoga ladder, one can come to Krishna consciousness bhakti yoga through either just straight through Karma Yoga, or from Karma Yoga to Ashtanga Yoga, and then to Krishna consciousness bhakti yoga, devotional service. Okay. I hope you follow that. I realize it's slightly complex. So we have here how many sections? We have 6 sections. At least this is the way that I've divided it up. And, I come in the old school from Buri Jan Prabhu, Giriraj Maharaj, that old school from the VIHE, and this is how we divide it up. So first section is from verse 1 to verse 4, which is about advancing in yoga through detached work. It's kind of revisiting an idea which we've discussed quite a bit already. Advancing in yoga through detached work. Then, second section is from verse 5 to verse 9, which is, it's sort of like, what to say? It's an introduction to Ashtanga Yoga from the perspective, from the point of view that there are these 2 levels. There are 2 levels of Ashtanga Yoga. In the first level, you do some Ashtanga Yoga, the different exercises and so on. We'll explain that shortly. But you also do Karma Yoga. So you're moving on from Karma Yoga and you're going into Ashtanga Yoga, the first level, which is called Yoga Ruruksha. Don't worry, I'll point out in the purport, I think it's a verse 3, where this term is. It's a, little complex Sanskrit term. And then the higher level of Ashtanga Yoga is called the Yoga Rudha level. So from verses 5 to 9, the progress of a devotee or a person, a yogi, from Karma Yoga into the lower form of Ashtanga Yoga, then the higher form of Ashtanga Yoga or higher level that's described. Then, third section is from verse 10 to verse 32. So it's a big section, it's 22, 23 verses. And it's basically just explaining Ashtanga Yoga. In essence, it's explaining Ashtanga Yoga. Then the fourth section is verses 33 to 36. And it's a very important section, and it's also relevant to devotees, although it's presented in the context of Ashtanga Yoga, but it's definitely relevant to devotees. It's called the mind and yoga practice. The good old mind. Ooh, Krishna. which has a tendency to be a pseudo-guru, to be a putana, and to confuse people. So that's 33 to 36. Then from 37 to 45 is another interesting discussion for devotees. It's about the destination of the unsuccessful yogi. If someone who's practicing yoga, even particularly Krishna consciousness, but in a general sense yoga of some sort, but either they fall down and just go away, or they die before they've actually completed the process. So in either of those two cases, you can say they're unsuccessful yogis. So what happens to them? This is an important discussion. Verse 37 to 45, the destination of the unsuccessful yogi. And then verses 46 and 47, 47 is the last verse of the whole chapter, that's about the topmost yogi. That's the devotee, very, very specifically the devotee, which then will lead us into the 7th chapter when we get there in a little while. All right, so let's now go into the first section, advancing in yoga through detached work, verses 1 to 4. And there are two subsections, verses 1 and 2, and then verses 3 and 4. So in verses 1 and 2, again, I guess, anyway, there's further discussion about sannyas and yoga. Yoga meaning karma yoga, or some form of yoga where you're working, you're doing things actively, whereas sannyas generally means more meditative, maybe analytical and inactive, and definitely not like working hard. Shri Shri Radharana Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. So okay, let's read the two verses then. Verse 1, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he's obligated is in the renounced order of life, and he's the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. That's interesting, isn't it? Another promotion of doing a duty. And verse 2, what is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme, O son of Pandu. For one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. Okay. So let's just have a look at these two verses. So first verse again, one who's unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he's obligated. We have heard this message before, haven't we? Such a person is in the renounced order of life. Aha! Such a person is a sannyasi. In chapter 5, and just in other places, but chapter 5 is one of them, chapter 3 also, a distinction was made between being a sannyasi and working in a detached spirit for the Lord. A distinction was made, wasn't it? That these are two distinct from each other, different processes. But here Krishna is now saying, no, that one who's unattached to his work, that means nishkam, and who works as he's obligated according to his duty, so it's karma yoga, is in the renounced order of life, is a sannyasi. Aha. And he's the true mystic, or like spiritualist, not just an inactive person who does nothing, which he expresses by saying, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. Prabhupada, right in the first sentence, says of the purport, in this chapter the Lord explains that the process of the eightfold yoga system, Ashtanga Yoga, is a means to control the mind and senses. So this verse, we note that it has its similarities to different of the verses and discussions in chapter 5. The basic idea, Prabhupada explains that even though Ashtanga Yoga is being discussed in this chapter, but still, Prabhupada makes the point, it's not really as effective as Karma Yoga. No, like we said, well, here you see, although this is now the third sentence in the first paragraph, although the Eightfold Yoga System is recommended in this chapter, I don't know if recommend is the best word. I mean, it's certainly described, but so the Lord emphasizes that the process of Karma Yoga, or acting in Krishna consciousness, is better. So, from time to time, even though Krishna is describing Ashtanga Yoga and doing these different exercises and things, Srila Prabhupada from time to time will remind us, as he did right then, that Krishna consciousness, devotional service, Karma Yoga is better. Yes, so if we do like that, then such a person is a real sannyasi. In the second paragraph, Prabhupada talks a little bit about these people these sannyasis, the jnani type, Sankhya type, not the Karma Yoga type who are doing duties in a renounced spirit, but these other jnani and that type of sannyasi. Sometimes they think they're liberated, so they stop doing fire yagyas, and if they're doing other duties, they may stop them, because they have this self-interest to merge into Brahman. Even the Ashtanga yogis as such, who are going to be described in this chapter, they do like that. And we'll see as we go through the description probably tomorrow of what they do, the activities of an Ashtanga yogi, then we'll see what is really involved. And we'll see that Prabhupada doesn't recommend it. So then, Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport, again emphasizing Krishna consciousness by quoting Lord Chaitanya from Shikshastakam. The fourth verse, Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor to enjoy beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. What I want only is the causeless mercy of your devotional service in my life, birth after birth. Right, so yes, Srila Prabhupada makes a comment in a class on this verse. Meditation means to stop all mundane occupation. Those who are advanced in Krishna consciousness have to work for Krishna. Just like an upset child, the mother says, my dear child, sit down here. And if the mother can keep him occupied doing various things, the child will be content. I'm sure we've all seen that. Parents, particularly mothers, engaging their children in something or other. Yeah, just to keep them busy and out of their little minds. And the children become pacified. The whole Bhagavad Gita is action. Fight for me. There are no don'ts. Krishna consciousness does not mean sitting idly. We can think of Krishna's pastimes, how they're full of activities. In the spiritual world, Krishna's always dancing. You have 24 hours to dance and to eat, and no time to sit around. There's no question of sitting down. Have you ever heard about the gopis meditating or sitting down? Can you imagine it? Or even Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay. Yeah, keep busily engaged. That's the idea. Are you checking Facebook? Should check. It's gone. I don't know what it's doing, but not doing well. Verse 2. What is called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. O son of Pandu, for one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So the basic idea really, well, Prabhupada says in the first paragraph, real sannyas yoga or bhakti means that one should know his constitutional position as the living entity and act accordingly. Yeah. So if we do like that, then a Krishna-conscious person, Prabhupada explains, a Krishna-conscious person, right in the middle of the purport, Prabhupada says, a person in Krishna consciousness has no opportunity to engage his senses in anything which is not for the purpose of Krishna. Therefore, a Krishna-conscious person is simultaneously a sannyasi, one of these renunciates who, cultivating knowledge, these types of people, and a yogi, meaning a karma yogi or a devotee engaged in devotional service. Yeah. And the need to restrain the senses and all that, which is there in the jnana, sankhya, inactive type of process, that's automatically fulfilled, automatically served, Prabhupada says, in Krishna consciousness. So therefore, both goals are achieved naturally and easily by being a devotee. Prabhupada says, all purposes, last sentence of the purport, all purposes are perfectly served by the practice of Krishna consciousness. All right, so now the second subsection of this first section is verses 3 and 4, and the idea there is, it is introducing now specifically Ashtanga Yoga, and the idea is that to advance in Ashtanga Yoga, one should work in the beginning and then give up work and focus on the meditation and all that. We mentioned that some minutes ago. So this is interesting now. Verse 3, we're going to get a real introduction into what is Ashtanga Yoga. An introduction. It's not, a full description, but it's definitely an introduction. All right, so, first thing is, Srila Prabhupada introduces the yoga ladder. Have a look in the purport. Right at the beginning, Prabhupada says, the process of linking oneself with the Supreme is called yoga. It may be compared to a ladder for attaining the topmost spiritual realization. It's the yoga ladder. This ladder begins from the lowest material condition of the living entity, means karma kandya. The yoga ladder begins with karma kandya, or basically just materialistic worship, usually of demigods. But in other traditions, like in Christianity, they don't have demigods, but they definitely pray for material things. So that's materialistic worship. And then Prabhupada continues, and rises up to the perfect self-realization in pure spiritual life, ultimately Krishna prema. So, according to various elevations, different parts of the ladder are known by different names. But all in all, the complete ladder is called yoga and may be divided into three parts, namely Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga. You know, if we were to be more explicit about it, actually, then if we really want to divide it up and include all the different elements which really should be included to get a picture of the yoga ladder, how is it working? It's working? Okay. Oh, it's just my telephone then. So, you know, if it's working, and just my telephone which is not doing well, then that's okay. Okay, sorry. So yeah, if we were to really delineate what's the yoga ladder, we would start, as we mentioned, as Prabhupada mentions, from the lowest material condition. That's karma kandya. Then we would go up to karma yoga. And then from karma yoga, we would go through either directly into bhakti yoga or through Ashtanga yoga, Jnana yoga. Sort of Jnana yoga, Ashtanga yoga, they're very closely related. More like immobile, inactive systems of yoga. Through them to bhakti yoga, to Krishna consciousness. So now, Prabhupada says, we're still in the first paragraph, the beginning of the ladder is called the Yoga Ruruksha stage, and the highest rung is called Yoga Rudha. This is going to be discussed a bit. These two stages, gradually progressing from one to the other in the next few verses. Then Prabhupada mentions the eightfold yoga system. He doesn't mention all the 8 parts. I'm going to mention them right now. Yeah, I'm going to mention them right now. If you like, you can write them down. First is yama. Yama, which means negative restrictions. Yama means negative rules. Then there is niyama, which means positive rules. You know, it sounds more like niyama is going to be negative, but it's actually positive. Then comes, just a sec. Then comes, the third is asana, which means physical exercises, or hatha yoga. It's actually hatha yoga. Fourth is pranayam, the breathing exercises. Fifth is pratyahara, withdrawing the mind from sense objects. Six is dharana, D-H-A-R-A-N-A, which means preliminary meditation. Then number 7 is dhyana, real meditation. And 8 is samadhi, full absorption in remembrance of the Lord, in trance. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur makes the point that until a person comes to the level of dhyana, or dharana or dhyana, the 6th or 7th stage, they should continue performing karma yoga. Like we said, this is just a description of a process. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada here in verse 3 purport, he concludes the purport by sort of, showing us, pointing out to us the special position of Krishna consciousness. A Krishna conscious person, however, is situated from the beginning on the platform of meditation because he always thinks of Krishna. And being constantly engaged in the service of Krishna, he is considered to have ceased all material activities. So in other words, Prabhupada is saying, we do not need to do this Ashtanga yoga. In other words, that Krishna consciousness takes us beyond the need for Ashtanga yoga. All right, so now let's see, where are we? Verse 4, let's see. So now this here, verse 3, was introducing really Ashtanga yoga in the sense of yoga ruruksha, yoga rurukshu, and yoga rudha. Now in verse 4, the advanced yoga rudha stage is being described. A person is said to be elevated in yoga, so it's more advanced, when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. So this is the yoga rudha stage. And of course, Srila Prabhupada looks at it from the perspective of pure Krishna consciousness. So now, that was the first subsection. Oh no, that's the end of the first section. Now we go on to the second section, which we've titled From the Yoga Rurukshu stage to the Yoga Rudha stage. In other words, coming from the point in Ashtanga yoga where you have to work, then you still have to work, although you're doing some Ashtanga yoga, to the point where you stop having to do work and then you just go into your meditation and so on like that. So that's from verse 5 to verse 9. And there's a couple of subsections. How many? I guess there's just, is it 2? There's 2 subsections. One's from verse 5. What is it now? Verse 5. Let's just check here. Yeah, verses 5 and 6. Verses 5 and 6. are telling us the mind can be your friend or your enemy. You have to deal with your mind to avoid problems. And then when you've got control of it, then you can engage it and it can help you. It can be your friend. So this is verses 5 and 6. I'm just going to go through the two verses. So number 5, one must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Or, perhaps in our experience, at least in my own, you could say, your mind really likes being your enemy. It can be your friend. If you train it, it can be your friend. But watch out for your mind. Just be careful. And in the purport, Prabhupada talks like that the mind is sort of the central point. Whether you got control of your mind or not, that's going to, your success or failure depends on that. So Prabhupada says, the mind must be trained for deliverance. In the purport, Prabhupada says that. And referring to the verse means the Sanskrit. Srila Prabhupada says that if you've got your Bhagavad Gita with you, in the third line, Atmaiva hi atmano bandhua, that the mind, eva means certainly, he means indeed, or definitely. It's like certainly, definitely can be your friend or your enemy. In other words, Krishna is really emphasizing it'll either be your friend or your enemy, but whatever you do, just work on your mind. Don't let it get the better of you. And verse 6, for him who has conquered his mind, the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. And there's something we've got here from a lecture of Prabhupada's on this verse and a few other verses, but referring specifically to this verse, Prabhupada says, so we have to make good association if we want to make our mind a friend. If you want to make your mind a friend, then you have to associate with a sadhu. So, yeah, this is really important. You want to get the better of your mind? Associate with a sadhu, someone who can train you and from whom you can learn, and who sometimes will point things out and cut through your nonsense. If you happen to have some nonsense, and while we're still, somewhat influenced by the material nature, we tend to have some nonsense sometimes. So now we go on to the second subsection here. It's verses 7 to 9. Then, so if you've controlled your mind, then you can come to the Yoga Ruda stage, the higher stage. The other two verses, 5 and 6 there, they're talking about going through the Yoga Ruruksha stage, getting focused. But now in the Yoga Ruda stage, your mind is fixed. You're elevated in Ashtanga Yoga. So one has to come to this level to be able to give up work and then concentrate the mind fully in Ashtanga Yoga. So it's verses 7, 8, and 9. Verse 7, For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. So, yeah. This is Yogaruda, but it's sort of like the beginning of Yogaruda. And the idea is to follow the dictation of the Lord. And really for us, to follow the dictation of the Lord in more sort of simple and practical terms means to accept some superior dictation. In our cases, this generally means either hearing from the Lord and the great devotees from Scripture, or hearing from bona fide spiritual master, the bona fide devotees, like this. Okay, that's verse 7. Verse 8. A person is said to be established in self-realization. Means definitely, doing nicely in Ashtanga Yoga, the Yogaruda stage, and is called a yogi or mystic when he's fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and is self-controlled. He sees everything, whether it be pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same. So this is Yogaruda, advanced Ashtanga Yoga consciousness. But a more advanced stage is described in verse 9. A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral mediators, the envious, friends and enemies, the pious and the sinners, all with an equal mind. So the thing is, in the previous verse, he was seeing pebbles, stones, and gold as being the same. But pebbles, stones, and gold can't really hurt you. They can't insult you or cheat you or something like that. But people can harm you, and it's harder to deal with people than inanimate things like stones, pebbles, and gold. Yes. So now we go into the third section, stages in the practice of Ashtanga Yoga, from verse 10 to verse 32. Let's just read a few verses just to get the feel for what's described here. Verse 10. Now remember, this is Ashtanga Yoga. In the purports, Prabhupada will point out the superiority of Krishna consciousness. This is 10. A transcendentalist should always engage his body, mind, and self in relationship with the Supreme. He should live alone in a secluded place and should always carefully control his mind. He should be free from desires and feelings of possessiveness. To some degree, this can be applied in Krishna consciousness. Living alone in a secluded place, that's not really so much for Krishna consciousness. But controlling the mind, being free from desires, possessiveness. Prabhupada explains, Shri Shri Radha Radhanath Shri Giri Govardhan Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ki Jai. We'll just carry on for another couple of minutes, if that's okay. So, there's room for application of Krishna consciousness here. And Prabhupada, of course, does that. Although, strictly speaking, literally, what's being described is Ashtanga Yoga. Then 11 and 12. To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deerskin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses, and activities and fixing the mind on one point. When we're chanting our rounds, those of us, who can still sit cross-legged, which excludes me, at least we should sit in a peaceful way. And the verse Krishna says, fix the mind on one point, chant our rounds. We should chant our rounds nicely. And let's just read 13 and 14 and then we'll finish. One should hold one's body, neck, and head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with an unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life. So yes, of course, like particularly when we're chanting our rounds, we should sit nicely. Unless you're really sick or something like that, you shouldn't lie down and chant your rounds. To try and sit nicely and be free from sex life and focus on Krishna and make him the goal of our life and render service to him. It's like this, Srila Prabhupada is saying. Okay. And last thing, I'll just read a comment of Srila Prabhupada in a class on these few verses here. Listen to this. So many so-called meditators might as well be asleep. Prabhupada makes snoring sound. I've seen them. As soon as you close your eyes, it's natural to feel sleepy. The correct process will help your mind to be unagitated, subdued, and devoid of fear. Generally, the yogis used to practice in the jungle and wondered if a tiger or snake or some other wild animal is coming. It is especially stated, devoid of fear and also completely free from sex life. You see, if you indulge in sex life,